So thank you all for your attention. Thank you, Ariana, for giving a good introduction to why we're doing this. So again, it's another RISKSUR collaborative effort, and I hope I acknowledge most of the people that are directly involved with the framework, even though we're actually informed by all the activities that are going on the RISKSUR. So as Ariana said, we felt there is a need to guide people into surveillance, to guide people into designing surveillance, but also documenting and sharing that information, and sharing the information about why they took those decisions. So what I'm going to present now is a framework that is embedded in the RISKSUR work with tools to evaluate the surveillance that is being carried out, as you see after lunch. And assuming that you've carried an evaluation and you know you have to improve your surveillance, how should you go about doing that? Or just documenting your surveillance simply? So what we designed is a framework that's supposed to be a guided tour to how surveillance is implemented. So it's not a calculator. It's not like you say, I want to do surveillance for disease X in a situation where the country is free. What's the best pathway? It's not really that. It doesn't take any decisions for you. But it assumes that a person used to the design of surveillance is going to try and go through the steps that it takes to design a good surveillance system. And our goal is to guide this person, rather a team, through all the information that is out there and the tools that are out there so that they know, okay, what's my first step? What is the next step? And through each of those steps, what is the information that I have available to take my decision? And let's document this decision and move on to the next step. That's what I hope will be clear during the process. So how did we do that? We first tried to structure what surveillance is and what steps one has to go about to design surveillance. So we defined one surveillance system as all the activities of surveillance that you do against one particular hazard, with one particular objective, in a specific area, covering a specific animal population, and taking into account risk characteristics. So that could be, for instance, and this is just an example, surveillance against blue tongue in Germany with the surveillance objective of disease freedom documentation. That's the system that you're going to either design or document, or redesign to improve, as we'll see later. And then we decided that the next level, we didn't decide, we just characterized what is already defined as the next level, which is the surveillance components, which is basically all the activities that you do to achieve that surveillance objective. So I have listed there a number of example activities. Once those activities are listed, your goal is to design them to better achieve your surveillance objective, and if needed, of course, add more activities. So the 3 steps that you're seeing on the screen, defining what a surveillance system is, characterizing the components, and then designing each of those components, is how we structure the design framework, which we intend one day to be a web tool. So there is already a preliminary web tool that we're working on, and on that tool, people will be able to go through exactly the steps I just described. So they go through the step of setting surveillance systems, and let's say they've listed the 4 surveillance systems on the screen. If they click on one of those surveillance systems, or if they click on list components, they have that second step, which is the overview of all the components that make this surveillance system. And then the final goal, and the most important, is to be able to design each of those components. And to do that, that's when it comes into play what I said about designing all the steps of surveillance. So those steps would be in the web tool, which is not available yet, it's not online yet, but I'm going to demonstrate what the tool should look like through some screenshots of a preliminary Excel tool that we've been developing. So the first step, as I said, is setting up the system. And through those screenshots, you see how the tool works. So in some cases, it's just a question. What's the hazard you want to design surveillance for? But we intend to put all the information for each step. I said before that in each step we want to give people information and references to guide them through the plethora of information that is out there. How do we intend to do that? We intend to put all the lessons and information that we collected through the surveillance review that was just talked about by Barbara and Ariana, and then also the literature reviews we did. And we'll put those lessons in the framework, but in the format of a wiki, so that users can actually contribute and update that knowledge. So even if the tool is, the skeleton of the tool is fixed, the information that a user accesses is actually a wiki that everyone can edit and keep improving. Some questions are not just a question, but an actual diagram to guide people through. So for instance, what's your surveillance objective? There is a diagram to help you decide what's really your surveillance objective, considering the terminology that we've adopted here. Here's an example of how we ask them for risk characteristics. So the tool never actually asks, are you designing a risk-based surveillance, yes or no? But it leads you into thinking about all the risk characteristics associated with the distribution of that hazard in your population, so that later, when we are designing a sample, those information that you entered about risk characteristics will be brought up, and you'll be told, remember you listed those risk characteristics. Think about how they could come into play into your sampling. And then finally, once the person has characterized their system, they are supposed to list the components. And this step is just like a cheat sheet of all your surveillance components. You just enter their name, what population you're going to target, where you're going to reach that population, what kind of test you're going to apply. It's what people think about when they think about components. They think, I have an abattoir component, I have a survey on farm component. That's the overview. But that's not the design yet. The design is made up by all those steps, or at least that's how we chose to characterize it after all the reviews we've done. So there is the target population, how do you define a disease suspicion, what enhancements you have to try to bring in more participation, what's the testing protocol, the study design, the sampling strategy. Once you design all that, how are you going to go about collecting those samples or the data? How you transfer those data or samples to the point where they're going to be analyzed? How do you analyze them? Who analyzes the data that's generated by this surveillance system? How do you disseminate the results? And how often and how do you do your surveillance review? Those are the sections, those are the main steps that we've come up with to design a surveillance component. And I don't have time to show each of them, but each of them is then a subset of other questions that lead you to, for instance, deciding what's your target population. I will just exemplify with one of those sections, the study design. So for instance, the first question they study design is what's the point of sample collection? But the user already defined that when they created that little overview of the components. So we just bring their answer back. And as you can see, there are several columns, so you can design several components in parallel, so that you're seeing, I'm designing an abattoir component, for instance, here, but I also have a surveillance component on the farm right next to it, and you can decide whether you're achieving your overall goal by seeing how all those components are fitting together. And again, in some cases, it's just a question with some information about what it is that you have to think about in this step, and your decision should go on the answer box. In some cases, we've pasted some information directly into the question, but we didn't want to crowd people with a lot of things to read through. So there are little pop-ups that they can click there and get information, but if they know already the answer, they don't have to read through that information. They just put the answer and move on. And in cases where we think you would need an epidemiological or a statistical tool, for instance, to calculate a sample size or to calculate a sensitivity, we've linked that. So if you come to a step where we're asking you something that you actually have to go calculate and then answer, we've put links to that tool when they're freely available, of course. So right now, except for the fact that I told you it's linked to tools and to advice, it looks pretty much like you're documenting your surveillance system. When the whole framework of RISKSUR comes into play, is when you're trying to do surveillance redesign. So let's say I documented my whole system, or I designed a new one, and then I do some evaluation and I realize that my system needs to be improved. So there is, and again, this is a screenshot of the Excel tool, there is a redesign page where it assumes, for some reason, desirably because you performed an evaluation, you decided that your system has poor sensitivity. So you want to use the same tool to redesign your system to improve sensitivity. So you click on the sensitivity button there, and what it does, it gives you a summary of all the steps you just went through, and it gives back your answers. So it's a list of all the surveillance you just designed, but the steps that are mostly likely to affect sensitivity are highlighted in green, and there is some information about how that step affects sensitivity. So you're going to go back to the system you just documented, and you're going to look which steps you should be thinking about changing if you want to improve sensitivity. We have covered some performance attributes, so sensitivity, coverage, bias, but we've also included an option to redesign surveillance, take into consideration cost, and I'll be really careful saying this because this is not a cost evaluation tool. It's just the same way we list which steps are most related to sensitivity, for instance, we can list which steps are most likely to impact cost. But how they evaluate if the redesign was good enough, they need to go to the cost evaluation tool. And we also added an option to redesign surveillance in order to increase its potential for multiple hazard. So if you want your surveillance component to be used in several surveillance systems, for instance, I collect samples, it's very common to collect samples, I don't know, for PRRS and pigs, and then test it for other diseases as well. So if you want to design a component that has maximum utility for several hazards, you can go through the same type of redesign. The framework already exists as this Excel tool. We, of course, still have to keep building on contact and build on the wiki. The next step for us is to improve it or strengthen it for specific surveillance objectives. So if you go to this tool to develop a surveillance system with the specific objective of early detection of disease, are there more tools or more information that should be a little bit tailored to that surveillance objective? And tomorrow during the SVPM conference, we're going to have a workshop where people can use the tool and give us feedback about how we can improve the tool for specific surveillance objectives. What we're hoping that this tool provides is, first of all, you go through it, what I've called the design tool. It's a set list of steps. But first of all, you're being reminded of what steps there are that you have to think about so you don't miss a step. Then for each step, you get information about what statistical tools are available. You have a direct link. You click there. It takes you to the tool, to the information on the wiki. So you're guided through all the references that are out there, and it makes sure you don't miss any step. The real value of the tool is also the redesign, where you have a chance to review those steps in light of the performance attribute that you want to improve. And as an added benefit, you've just documented your system. So the tool has a button, you generate a PDF report of all the information you entered. In a lot of steps, we've added fields where you can just enter more notes so that your system is documented. And that documentation is good for communication among countries, but it's also good within the institutions so that 2 years from now, you remember why you took those decisions. You remember why your system was designed the way it was designed. Right now, the web tool is being developed, and we hope will be available by this summer. What we have right now is this entire tool on an Excel file. Anyone who has the time and wants to test the tool is welcome to email us. At this point, however, because we're still building the tool, we do ask that people that have access to it fill in a form with feedback to contribute with any opinions, any critics, any ideas for how we can improve it. Again, there is a workshop tomorrow where people will have a chance to use the tool and give us feedback. So if you're willing to test it out, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you for your attention.